Hey there, what's up? I hope you guys are having an awesome day. It's Simon Hurley from Inklips here, and today I'm going to be sharing some fun techniques and projects using the new Distress Resist spray. When I saw this stuff at Creativation, I was super inspired because of how easy it was to apply and the many different things you could do with it. So I'm super excited to share my projects using this and also using some of the new fun Distress Oxide colors. Now there are a couple of ground rules when you're working with the spray, so I wanted to just quickly cover those before we get started here. First off, you're going to want to work inside of a box when you're using the spray. So I like this postage mailing box just because it has these larger edges on it, so you get that finer mist by holding the spray up higher. But you can also work in something like a shoebox. You just want to make sure that it doesn't get all over your work surface because it won't come off once you're done. So keep your work inside the box when you're spraying with your mist. Also, you don't want to use this stuff with your stamps. Apparently when you spray it onto there, it'll kind of stick right to your stamp and won't come off. So I'm glad Tim had tested that out before we had to. So without further ado, let's turn down to the table and get started. Alright, so for the first card, I'm going to be sharing how to use the resist spray right through a stencil, so you get that fun stenciled pattern with the resist, and it's really easy to do too, which I love. So I'm using this Mermaid Wave stencil from Hero Arts, and it's got lots of detail, so it'll hold up the test of this spray. So here I'm laying that right over top of my piece of cardstock and inside the box. And I'm going to take my resist spray and lightly spray it over the whole surface of the cardstock here. You don't want to spray too much so that it ends up being a pool and seeps underneath your cardstock. So I just lightly mist and make sure the bottle is moving around as you're spraying to get that nice coating of spray. So once I'm done, I'll lift off my stencil really carefully and then I'll pull that over, and you're going to want to clean this right away. So I have this little bucket of water on my desk and I'm going to dunk it in there, and you can see some of that spray comes off right away and kind of floats to the surface. You want to make sure you do this right away and get everything nice and clean so that there's no residue left on your stencils, and if you don't want to clean it right away, just dunk it in the water and come back to it after you're done working. So if you're impatient like me, this is the time that I pulled out my heat gun and just dried this off. Now it doesn't take too long to dry without it, but I always like to speed up the process, and it is heat stable. So once it's dry, it turns a nice clear color, and it still looks like it's wet, so you might just have to kind of touch it to see if it's dry. So then I'm going to move on to applying my Distress Oxides. So I'm using some of the older and some of the new colors here, using some blues and greens to complete this little ocean scene. So I'll just use my mini ink blending tools to apply the color on. And as I blend the color on, you can see that some of the areas have that darker coating of the resist there, and some of the areas are more speckled and less resisted, and that's one of the unique things about this spray. So besides it being super easy to apply, you get the different kind of speckles and unique kind of distressed look almost on your cardstock where the spray didn't quite cover the whole area. So I really love the look of that, and you never quite know what you're going to get when you spray this over top. So then after I'm done ink blending over top here, I'm just going to wipe off the surface with a dry rag, and you can see that it kind of reveals some of those resisted areas there and gets rid of any ink that's on the surface. So then to reactivate or to kind of brighten up the Distress Oxides, I sprayed a little bit of water over top, and you can really see how that brightens up the background. So for the next technique here, I'm going to share how to kind of get the reverse of that stenciled effect in the first one here. So let's rewind a little bit. This is back to when I sprayed that stencil, and right when I pulled it off, I took it onto another piece of cardstock with paper towel underneath, and I dipped that and kind of almost used it like a stamp on the surface of the cardstock here. And then with my little rag, I'm going to pat it over top to make sure that I apply pressure there so that the resist spray gets onto the surface of there. So kind of like with watercolor through a stencil, where you get that doubled reversed effect, I tried that same thing with the resist spray here. So you can see that it kind of peels up the cardstock. It wasn't exactly what I was expecting, but it did add some of that resist spray onto the cardstock here. So then I'm going to blend on some of the Distress Oxides here. So I chose some really warm, bright colors to blend onto this background. And you can see as I start to do this, you can see that stenciled pattern really coming in here. And it was completely a different effect than I thought it would give. It wasn't quite what I thought would happen, but I do really love the results. So you want to make sure that when you do it though, you really stamp that stencil down fast so that it doesn't peel up or rip your cardstock in the process. So after I've applied those Distress Oxides here, I'm going to go in and buff off the surface with that dry rag, and it didn't completely peel off the colors, which I was kind of fine with. I really liked how it turned out. and then I'll spray some water right over the top to react and oxidize those colors. Now for the next technique, I'm going to share how to mask off an image so you can create whatever background behind you want and it'll resist all that ink behind there. So I'm using the Frisky Feline stamp set from Gina K, and I just love this little cat image here. So I'm stamping it down onto the cardstock where I want it to end up in the final card, and then I'm just going to go in and quickly color it with Copic markers here. You could really color with whatever medium you want to. You just want to lay down some color because this is how the cat will look in the end result. So you want to make sure you like how it looks before you do any of the resist spray. And also when I did my coloring, I used a blender marker after I was done and just dotted on some of that colorless blender. So it created a really fun kind of fur-like texture. So you can play around with coloring with the blender too. So after that, I took the die set that went along with it and I cut out that little cat die that coordinated. And you want to make sure you have cardstock all around the die that'll cover up the cardstock. So here I'm going to bring in that card panel again, and it'll create that little window with just a little white border around the cat. So then I'll take that and I'll line that up in my box again using no tape, but you could tape it down if you wanted it to. And then I'll just lightly spray over top again to mask off that whole image. So here I'm making sure that I get a little more coverage than I did in the last, just because I wanted it to really have that nice coating over top of it and not get any ink inside. So then I'm drying it off with my heat tool again until it turns nice and clear. So you'll kind of be able to see when it turns, but it still does look a little bit wet when it's completely dry. So then after that's all dry, I wanted to create a simple little inked background behind it. Now you could go crazy here with inks and it'll resist it all, but I just went pretty simple with some ink blending. And I'm using one of those new Distress stencil brushes too. I love how this turned out because I didn't want any harsh lines behind that little cat there to kind of ruin the background. So with this little brush, you get that really nice soft blend, and I was able to fade it out into the white space without having any harsh marks from a blending tool. So next, after the cat is all inked up here, you might look like you ruined your little image there, but I'm just going to take a dry cloth and wipe it right over top of that to remove all the ink and reveal your image again. So here, like I said, anything will resist this, so I just went in and I sprayed over top of a little diamond stencil here, and then I'll wipe off some of the ink, so it just oxidized the little area where your stencil was. So you could go crazy with inking this background with sprays and inks and stuff, and it'll all resist it. So for this next background, I'm going to share how to do kind of like a tone-on-tone look, but using the color of the cardstock that's underneath, if that makes any sense. So here I've taken a flower confetti cover plate die from Hero Arts. I don't have a ton of stencils, so this is kind of a makeshift stencil that I cut out. And I'll line that up right over top of a blue panel cardstock here. And I've switched and upgraded to a larger box, so you can see that fun little postage pattern on the inside there. But then I'm able to spray from a higher distance, and that gives me a finer mist here. So I've misted over top of that piece of cardstock. And when you make your own stencil like this out of paper, you can also use that white portion to ink up too, since it has that fun resist on it now. So after that spray resisted area is all nice and dry, I'm going to go in here with a white pigment ink, and I'm just going to smoosh that ink all over the cardstock here. So I'm just laying down a layer of that white pigment ink all over the cardstock, and usually I try to avoid pigment ink, it's not my favorite. But then I'm going to go in with my rag here, and I'm just going to kind of buff that pigment ink into the cardstock, and you'll see those resisted areas come through as darker, and the area underneath, that's just the cardstock background, is a lot lighter. So it creates that fun tone-on-tone effect, and you could layer up this whole background as many times as you want with that pigment ink there. Now this next card is similar to what I just shared, except it has a different color underneath than the ink that's over top of it. So I've just lined up a piece of cardstock in my box, and I'm going to lightly mist over top of it again, but this time I'm pulling the nozzle down a little bit slower, so you get kind of a thicker mist with more blobs and things like that, so it gives a fun pattern to kind of work with. So then I'm applying some Distress Oxide over top of this, and I'm really heavily adding that color with the blending tool here. The more ink, the better, because I wanted it to kind of cover up that color that's underneath and replace it with this completely new Peacock Feathers color. So as I'm adding on the ink there, I'm just really heavily adding this, and you could even just take the ink pad and kind of smoosh it onto the paper like I did with the white ink pad earlier. Then next I'm just taking that dry cloth, And I'm just going to wipe off whatever ink is on top of the resisted area there. And you can see that green start to kind of peek through again there. So you get that really fun effect. Now for this next card, I'm going to share a technique that I saw Tim do over at Creativation. So this one's a lot of fun, and I really loved seeing it. So I've just laid down that mermaid stencil over top of the cardstock again, and I'm just going to finally leave a mist over top of this whole surface. So just spraying over top of the whole thing. And then I'm using one of Ranger's new beautiful embossing powders. This is the Aqua Tinsel. And I'm just going to dump that over top of the whole background here. And this is really quickly after I've sprayed it. You don't want to give it time to dry in between. And it just kind of coats that surface. And similar to what it's always been doing here, it leaves kind of that speckly result, and you're not quite sure what you're going to get when you put it down. Which is one of the things I really love about this spray. It's kind of unpredictable when you spray it. So then I'm going to heat set that again, and it's not going to disturb the spray, but it'll emboss that pattern. And you get kind of that gritty texture with that really fun embossing there. So now onto the last card. Here I just created a fun background, but I'm using vellum, so it's kind of that see-through medium as well here. So I'm just going to spray that over top, again kind of pulling the nozzle down slower so you get those fun little splatters and blobs. So after I've done that, you can see the vellum kind of trying to curl up here, but I was determined, so I pulled it out of the box here and heat set that to dry it off. I just made sure not to really bring it too close to that vellum so that it would warp the vellum, but I just wanted to dry off all of those little blobs there. So now I was still really determined, and the vellum was trying to curl up on me. So I taped that down to the surface that I was working on, and I'm going to move on to inking up my background. So I'm going to create kind of like a sunset looking background here, and I found that the best inks that will stick to this vellum here are the Hero Arts Hybrid inks. They stick really nicely onto here, and they're really bright colors, which I really love as well. Because some inks don't completely dry on top of slicker surfaces like this, so you just want to kind of test it out beforehand. So I'm inking up this background just using my mini ink blending tools, and this last darker blue was kind of vibrant, so I went back with that aqua color and kind of blended everything together really nicely. Now I wanted to share how I added this onto my card because it was a little bit tricky. I just took a little bit of some strong adhesive like score tape and lined the edges of the front of that background, and then I cut a window panel out of my card, a top folding card base, and I just adhered that right onto the inside of the card. So then I'm just going to press that down really nicely so it doesn't curl up. And on the front side where the little clouds kind of peek out, I added down some collage medium in the matte surface, and I'm just going to squeeze some of that out underneath there and add an acrylic block down to hold it down as it dries, and that held it all together really nicely. Alright, now that all the backgrounds are created, I'm going to quickly run through how I added all of these together. And if you're interested in any of the products that I used, be sure to click the link down below to my blog where you can go shopping for any of these products. So to finish off this first card, I used the Hero Arts Makeup Fountain stamp set with that little mermaid there, and I stamped that onto a circle die cut with the hello there sentiment and added that right onto the side of my card. And I think that finishes off the background really nicely, and I just added some glitter paper as well just to kind of finish everything off. For this next card, I used the You Get Me stamp set from Gina K for that awesome You're My Person stamp, and I love the little script sentiment there. And then I also used the Playful Pup stamp set to get that little adorable puppy there, and I colored that in and added it all onto the card with that little heart cutout for the background. Now for this next card, I used the Gina K Frisky Feline stamp set. So you saw that one, but I just added the sentiment onto the card and added some hearts with Nuvo drops, and I also ripped that background to create a fun texture on there as well. For the next card, I actually used the Makeup Fountain stamp set to create an actual fountain. So I added a little fountain and the fish there as well, and finished off the card with some Nuvo clear accents for all of the water portions. And then I just framed it all up with a cardstock panel and stamped the Hope You Have a Beautiful Day sentiment, which I think finishes off nicely. Now for the next card, I used the You and Me Together stamp set and stamped one of those little sheep on the card, and then I also used the Wishing You a Happy Birthday sentiment and cut that into a fun little banner and added that all together onto the card. On the next example, I cut out a little circle frame there to kind of frame along that fun background with the embossing. And then I used the Hero Arts Coral dies in a bunch of different paper colors and lined the bottom of that little frame there. And I also used the Pretty Pink Pash Sea Friends and colored in 2 of those fun little critters and added that onto the card for a fun little focal point there. Now for this last card, I used the Safari window die to cut out that little window there with those clouds. And then I took the Swans and Cattails Hero Art stamp set and I stamped out some of those images and colored them in to kind of finish off a little scene there. And then I stamped the wishing you a beautiful day sentiment underneath it with that fun script font. Now if you're not into all those little critters, I also created this with just a little heart die, and then I took the Prayers die cut from the Prayers stamp and cut set from Hero Arts, and I finished it off with that and a little bit of tonic glitter paper. So you don't have to finish all the cards off with critters, it's just what I love to do. Alright, I hope you guys really enjoyed this video and learned a little bit more about some fun techniques you can do with the Distress Resist spray. Be sure to leave me a comment down below on what you would do with the spray. And also be sure to give this video a big thumbs up, and if you enjoyed it, click that subscribe button down below and the little bell icon next to it. That way you'll be notified every time I post a fun crafting video like this, and I would love to see you guys again soon. Have a great day. Bye.